um, the sanitation, market sanitation based. I'm going to introduce you to specialists. Welcome everybody. So directly, I'm going to start with the context of the market-based sanitation in Madagascar. This context of sanitation implies the fact that we have a history which is quite loaded with different approaches proposed by Ranwas and different other projects. We have different types of approaches. We have the CLTS approach, which is providing us with a very limited and mitigated outcome. And so we had to find a different approach which is more sustainable. So we proposed the market-based sanitation. The sustainability is one of the advantages of this model in the market, and what motivated us to work on that. So in terms of sanitation, this is a business. An important business, but also presenting a few challenges. And we all know that the business scales is very important for the viability of a business, and we all know that it is a sector where we need to have different abilities, the positioning, marketing, the masonry, and everything, all expertise for us to put in place a marketplace sanitation. And overall, we have a geocultural differentiation variety in Madagascar. In the coast part or in the highlands, we have a different culture which would have impact in the implementation of this approach. And we all know that it is totally possible to scale up markets, and some markets are still exploitable in this domain. So we all know that thanks to the interventions of this project, the demands are increasing considerably during the implementation of this business. So for you, we're going to speak of the essential strategic elements based on a document available on the website, and then we will speak of the market response as a follow-up to tests. And number 3, we're going to talk about the label, branding, and the structuration to bring to the table a volume of the market. And all these elements are all necessary. So let's start with the starting. We need to understand the market first. So what did we do for that? We use the human-centered design approach, which is centered on the human, and then looking for a solution based on the users. So all decisions made are based on centered on human, the communication. Every tool approach are centered on the human. This is producing a segmentation of the market, which is very pertinent to me. And the current limitation that we have to scale up, and the different opportunities that we can identify on this first document. You can have the graph. We have 94 users and 27 private sector actors and 19 community actors. We have the non-users of the latrines and at the national level, and we also have actors, health providers. So you can find all those data on the documents on the website. So we had to try to understand the market, and for that, I'm sure you understood, you know that we have to speak of rapidly to health It is totally related to health, and that is justified and true. But between us, that is not really business marketing. This is not to be avoided, but not always put that on the spot. So if we do not put on the spot the health, what do we have to put on the spot? So this document is going to talk about that. What should be put on the spot when we speak of sales. So we all know that we should not dwell too long on the health aspect. We have to use the other levers, and when we do that, we need to understand that why the toilets are not being sold. I'd like to ask you a question. Have you ever heard the question, do you know a good restaurant? Or, for example, do you know a good mechanics? And, for example, do you know a great latrine mason? We've never heard about that. That's not a question we can ask very simply. Yet, that is the type of questions that we need to ask for us to create a sanitation business. We need to settle the demand, the orders. So what type of toilets do we want? Those are the toilets that we don't want to use. There is no orders, no demands on the use of latrines. These are not models that we are looking for. We don't want to pay those types of latrines, and that is to promote the sector for the sales of the toilets. And the question I asked earlier, those are the questions. Where can we find good builders of toilets? And that is not the criteria. Are not responding to the criteria of demands. These are really good toilets. Yeah, we've got different types of toilets, of course, but the question is, what type of models do you want? And this is not responding to the criteria of desires, and this is not the type of toilets that the person wants. But this remains a limitation factor, which is translating different opportunities. And we have people who are proposing modern latrines. And when I read my sentences, we as Malagasy, we are ready to pay for those services, but we have to bargain a little bit. The motivation and the psychology is pushing people to desire something. That is the most important. When we want something, when we desire something, we are ready to pay. And sincerely, the conditions are mature to move on to the market phase, and where the actors are very mature. So on this document, I'm proposing you a roadmap to put in place a business on the strategy aspect. We have the segmentation of the market and the sequencing of the interventions that who to target first, and the guide step by step. How do we develop a product? And we just do not, we cannot just ask some Siemens, and how do we activate demands? And all that you can find in the documents. This is a very complete document. For the continuation of this roadmap, the first important things we mentioned is the supply chain the supply chain or the value chain, which is we have information on how to structure this value chain, how to make sure that those products are arriving to the clients. What are the mechanisms that you can envision? So what are the mechanisms we can use to put in place that distribution, that value chain. And that is something that you can find, you can discover in the tool. We have the segmentation, we have the early adopters. So these are people who saw things elsewhere and who like to be in advance compared to their fellows. So we have 7 categories of segmentations, and the first target we have on the second part, we have the copycat, the people who likes to copy the people who are way in advance. And once we targeted those who are in advance, everybody would like to be advanced. And if we take the example of the communication, everybody wants to be like those people because they copy on those people. You can also find the different key elements, the chapters of the products should be desirable. For example, there should be an analysis, a study phase to identify the criteria of desirability of the products. This is to target the segments, and finally to structure the procurement, the value chain, depending on the segments and the products. We're going to take some examples later on. And in this document, you can find the calendar of implementation and the highlands to implement what type of activities. We have to do some prospections on the period of time for the sales. And here it is very important to mention that it's really good. It's sometimes difficult to start businesses on the coast part of Madagascar because the viability of the business is very, very difficult. And maybe we can invest where we have very tight market. These are the types of information that you can get from these documents. And as a bonus in this webinar, the link to the success stories, how much time did it take to put in place the businesses, what are the key elements so that we can implement. I'm joking, this is within one single document that you can find on the website of Brainwash, and this can be found on the site. I'm going to share the links, don't worry, at the end of this presentation. So once we have the strategy, what's the next step? We have to deploy. We have to, this next slide is to present our ideas to the clients, to the users, and is it going to work? That's a strategy. Is that something that people can use? On this piloting phase, we have the second documents, and this in this document we have a big circle and a small circle, and then we're going to take the small circle, which is specifically used. We have the ideation phase. We have to collect the data and collect the ideas, and then put some indicators on the idea. For example, of the first idea is to have a dalle. We have I need to find a pit. For example, this pit should be based on different criteria: the texture, the color, the material used to make the dalle. And this is a way to test those models and those criteria. And once those criteria are identified and specified, we have to move on to the pilot test phase. So to identify everything which is interesting in terms of variability. Are we going to use a round house or a square house, or on greens based on greens. So we have to base our constructions on the fruit of those studies. We can start with simple photos, and then we can move on to 3D prototypes, drawing, and each of those prototypes are assessed, and which is what is the most appreciated by the client. And here we have illustrations on how to do that. And if you take the lowest resolution picture, you can have the picture on the left. You have a Turkish dale, and people are going to refer to some criteria. We can increase the resolution for a better resolution. For example, here we have a superstructure on roofs, and we also have another Satopan interface within a concrete building. So down it's a little bit round. So you need to make a comparison between those prototypes, and those prototypes were not built by coincidence, and there's also processes you need to respect, because those clients are going to respond to your products. Even if it's a product which is not corresponding to their needs, they're going to respond to it a little bit, and they're going to proceed per steps, the two types of resolutions we talked. So once those physical prototypes are identified, it's a very, very long process actually. Then after that, we have to move to a very difficult and long process, which is the communication. So for the case of Lukumu, for example, we used, we took advantage of the influence of the traditional leaders to promote the notoriety of the local promoters and the agents during a mass gathering. And the channels, communication channels used are the social proofs, so that everybody would use the product, and they were going to leave that to toilet producers, which is reliable. And that is the types of effects that we'd like to promote when we speak of channels of communication. And the psychological lever we need to consider. An important point is the impact. The local impact is very important. So during the conception of those tools, you can take an instance of a village, and everybody knows everybody in a village, almost. And if there's somebody, and everybody knows everybody in the village, and if you if somebody is famous thanks to flyers, everybody would have a facility to project to any other types of person that you're going to put on the support, on visuals. And the communication is better when it is targeted, and the most important is to find a balance between efficacy and the costs, and the production of those visual support is very important. The values, the messages, the social status, and the cleanliness, the quality of the products are very important. I just wanted to take some time to speak of the piloting tests. And we have the superstructures with concretes, which are very, very well used, and we also have the squares, and people have their preferences, of course. So when we speak of prototypes, you can find this on the websites. When we see the quotations and the size, and all these have impact on the desires of people. Sometimes, if it's very big, it's a little bit expensive. If it's small, it's not really good. So finally, we should not forget that we remain in the domain of development and call for projects. We have systems of optimization. I'm going to explain this a little bit. Here, for example, we know that the iron, the concrete are essential elements to develop toilets, and yet those are elements that we can intervene, for example, by setting linkages or bargaining bulk purchasing with service providers. You can also say use molds, and make our own molds if we intervene in an unconsidered way. So we subsidize a lot one intervention, non-considered. We need to evaluate the market, and this document is going to help you on how to intervene in the market. And finally, we're going to speak of we have the label to federate everybody on the production of the label Compagnie Madame. You may have you may be fed up with this, but this is something we are always talking about, and to ameliorate the services of the producers, and we can scale it up to the national level. We have to professionalize. We need cart visits. We need some expertise, and also reputation to be diffused. As we said earlier, this slide is just repeating what we said, but we have the images, the uniforms, the expertise, and we have the supports, the tools that you can find on the sites, all the flyers, and the products and marketing supports can be found on the site, of course. So, apart from that, we aligned the finance aspect and the funding processes of the entrepreneurs and the clients. We didn't push this until the accomplishment of the project, but we have a synoptic board, and with the opportunities of fundings for the clients and the households. And the ultimate objective is to pay those microfinance via mobile money to render this approach easy. This is a system which is very well diffused. You've heard about this before on different domains for the flat TV, satellite TV. We have a different approach. This is an approach which is transposable in this sector, and the market, as we said, is appropriate to this approach. So where can you find the documents? It's on the runwash.org website. You open runwash.org and you click on project and change behavior changes on the use of the services, and then you can click on market-based sanitation, and you can have access to the different types of documents available on this sector. So I'd like to invite you to explore the site, this part of the site, and you have all the information in details, more than what I explicited. So a bonus document that I can share with you, you can go to Runwash resources and the seminar. You can also have all the documents. We have the follow-up of the activities, everything related to performance management, commercialization, everything related to the activities can be found in this. So it can be seen in this bonus document. So I'd like to invite you. You can consult the site of Runwash. On this market-based sanitation, you can find those the elements that we can find very, very pertinent for all types of actors. Do not hesitate to use those tools. And if you have any questions, we can receive. You can send the questions on the chat box. You can send the questions to Claudia. The address will be shared for any questions at all time. Thank you so much. This is the end of my presentation. Do not forget that later we have my team from Sandachan who's going to talk about phases management. Thank you so much. I'm waiting for your question for any. Let's have a 5-minute session for the question. We have Marina, and then we can go for Manzaka's presentation. Marina, over to you. Thank you too for the presentation and for the experience sharing. I've got a question. Just a question first, and I'm going to explore the slides when we launch the strategies on and the market-based accusation. It's true that the health aspect is not working on the marketing. And did you have the test on the community on this specific approach? Can we have the success figures before we can say that the documents, before we saying that is not working? So what is the rate after the test and application and sensitization? How many households did you reach to appropriate and adhere to the construction of latrines? And has it been subsidized? Thank you. Thank you, Marina, for the question. I'm going to answer that question. We had a piloting phase of the activities, and we had a scale-up diffusion of those principles, but in terms of response of the market, qualitatively speaking, the messages which are working the most are the health. Not really the health, but the well-being of the children, the robustness of the structures, and the modernity amongst the messages that were collected on the first segment. But the messages are varying depending on the segment, and there is a mixture of everything. So these are the messages that are most effective. So one of the lesson learned is we should not try to work on a generic messages, but on a specified message for each segment. And in terms of figures, for one day of exhibition among the 3 days of exhibition, where we had some piloting tests, where we could have about 20 orders, and that was expand to 35 orders in the months after the sensitization was done in the site, and the installation is continuing to date. And we did some monitoring less than 1 week. The installations are continuing on the sites. So that the response of the market is very important. The number is I cannot say that the number has increased considerably, but our colleague Asu would like to add something to that. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Marina, for the question. To add to what Tsu has mentioned earlier, I would like to invite you to consult the website on behavior change and the uses of the services. We have documents. We have a presentation made by a partner on the behavior changes. And in this document, it is presented, we have presented different behavior change approach, and part of them, depending on the global social marketing, which is the most effective compared to communication and education activities. So when we speak of arguments on health, so these are sensitization and education, communication. So if we did not carry out the specific studies on that, we have references on the recent studies on behavior change or at the level of the markets, where we can have more possibilities for better results, more than education and education strategy. I hope that we could answer to your question. You can always write your questions. I suggest to move on to the next questions or other comments, if there are. While waiting the installation of the projection, I'd like to suggest you to revisit some aspects of the importance of we talked about the market-based education and the activities led by Ranwash on the faculty management that we found very, very complementary, because the increase of the number of the toilets or latrines is also needs to work on the improvement of the treatments in parallel, and you know what I mean. Now, for this second presentation, we're going to speak of the study and rhythmization of the services of management of the emptying of the latrines in Madagascar. This study was carried out by Santajan, us, and I am the representative of Santajan, Manzaka. For this presentation, we're going to divide the presentation in 4 parts, depending on the plan you can see on the slides. So on the first part, we will speak of the diagnosis on the surfaces, and then we will discuss the studies, the pilot studies on a specific site. The third part would be on the market study of emptying market, and last we're going to share the tools the project used and developed for the emptying, latrine emptying. Overall, the objective of this study was to identify and to study in depth the piloting activities of the emptying management of latrines in Madagascar, and the regions of interventions of the projects. We did some sampling in Fianarantsoa city, Toamasina, Fulpointy, Ambohibar, Sambine, 3 regions of interventions of the project. Otomatsatra, Antsinanana, and Vakanakaratra. So the study was carried out by contextual analysis on the situation of those 4 zones, and then we conducted diagnosis on the actors for these activities, and then we identified the potential sites and the operators who have the capacity to operationalize the services. For the first part, we did some diagnosis on 4 existing services of emptying, which is related to pit emptying in the mentioned city. So within the frame of Fianarantsoa, we have a private enterprise managing this service, which is Ecodiu Vidange. This project was operational since 2020, initiated by the 3F program, and then Horizon, supported by Horizon and ONG Practica. This enterprise in terms of system of treatment, it's a treatment by hydro drying technique, and the treatment is done every 5 months. So the client of the enterprises designed the treatment depending on the context, be it simple pit or septic pit. And we also have another association initiated by Tiuntulu and supported by Medea and Crete. And this is something classical, actually. And the collection is used manually with baguettes and transported by wheelbarrow or chart. In Full Point, we have another private operator, which is within the same project, Media 2, funded by UNICEF. The system was operational since 2018, and the treatment system is composed of a biodigester and a dryer for the treatment, and the treatment is lasting 3 months, and the collection is with a galper, and the transport is done with a motoculture. We also diagnosed, like in Tuamasin, we have an enterprise called Clean Impact. This was initiated by the NGO Protos and supported by Practica and another agency. This has been functional since 2018. The method of treatment is based on a bed of drying planted, and the period of treatment is lasting 3 to 4 months. It can be done manually or by pumping from an inspiring engine. So after the diagnosis, we identified a few challenges, a few barriers, and also the advantages to these activities. Overall, The challenges are the non-understanding of the institutional frame to put in place formal activities, but also the insufficient of demands. On the commune squeeze, the manager in this sector also identified the lack of demands because of the lack of education and the communication on the existence of those services. We also need to work on trainings of the managers on technical, institutional, and social, and more especially at the level of the commune Swiss, kind of a catalyst of those activities. And finally, one of the challenges is the lack of the materials or the financial resources to enable the manager to be autonomous, because most of those activities, the manager is always accompanied by NGOs for them to be viable. So, however, we identified some advantages as well for this activity. The opening of the market to the biological fertilizer like POCs, we also have the provision of annex services like the provision of latrines and the installation of those materials for the targeted regions, where we also identified a huge number of population for the managers of the emptying, treatment and emptying, to have access to more clients, in condition that those services are respecting the norms. And one of the advantages is that the market is existing, and there's a strong potential, and which is very developed in terms of techniques like the biogas or better use of biological fertilizer. After the diagnosis, we did some piloting site studies in Fianarantsoa. Why Fianarantsoa? Fianarantsoa because we had some criteria of evaluation, which are technical, institutional, and financial as well. We did some classification depending on the criteria to identify which sites is chosen to be a pilot site, and Eco du Vidange was identified because this is an enterprise which is working in the emptying treatments for 2 years now, almost 3 years, which is in a phase of development and extension right now. Why? Even if this site has been classified as piloting sites, the reinforcements and the amelioration are also needed to redynamize the services, but also to improve the use of material, to improve the use of materials. So the study is concentrating on EcoDu and its activities. For the case of Fianarantsoa, we have a population of 220,000 inhabitants in 2022, with an increase in inhabitants to 350,000 inhabitants up to 2038. We have also needs on urban sanitation. For Fianarantsoa, 62% of the households possess latrines. Only 2% owns for septic, and the others are still practicing open air defecation. And in Fianarantsoa, the project was implemented, as mentioned earlier, by TRASEF and the Horizon NGO continued the activities, and it was supported by ONG Paprika in 2018, and in 2020 we started to provide emptying services, and last year in 2022 EcoDue is counting 430 clients, representing about 50% of its capacity of treatment. Technically, on the description of the system, after the collect, those mud were treated, dried, and separated by drain, and after 90 days will be treated for 60 more days to eliminate the pathologies, and after analysis on a certain number of elements, those the composting is being made, and the reuse of those products after 60 days. In terms of infrastructure, the system used by exploited by EcoDue is composed of the elements that we discussed in the slides, but overall we have the 98 the bed of for drying, the zone of conditioning, and the filtering basin. So the third part is focused on the market studies, and as an instance, we're going to take the case of EcoDue in Fianarantsoa regarding the demands for the emptying mud. The demands is still very feasible, and as EcoDue has a treatment capacity of 1,500 cubic meters per year, and can work on a representation of 15% of the population. The mud produced by a simple pit is constituting a big part of the market and exploited by EcoDue. However, the big part of this market is accessible for the operators, which is an ultimate strategy to reach, and we need sensitization, communication, education that we need to amplify, because the population are more sensitive to use informal emptying. So because they are proposing very expensive services, but respecting the norms. So one of the issues is to have the adequate materials, because most of those of the pits are not accessible to the materials, but also to have access to different buildings, restaurants, schools, and healthcare facilities, and other different infrastructures, public infrastructures like attraction parks and markets and monoblocks, and the second products of transformation, which is the biofertilizer. The turnout is very small, maybe because of the competitions and with the traditional fertilizing practices, but there's also a lack of sensitization and information for those types of projects, like promoted by EcoDue. We can also talk about the cultural values, which is making the community very reluctant to use that type of the human feces fertilizer. So when the offers proposed by EcoDue are under qualitative and quantitative analysis based on the layers of the categories of population and the potentiality of the market. As we said, the capacity of treatment of EcoDue is just representing 50% of the available market, and for informal emptying, the situation in Fenara-2 is disturbing the offer, the work of EcoDue, because we have informal emptiers without respecting the norms and the conditions, and this is preventing the exclusivity of the work provided by EcoDue. So after the analysis of the offer, there are some improvements that were proposed by the studies carried out by Ranmoash, responding to radical needs, especially in the urban areas, to have an affordable emptying surfaces to be adapted to any type of needs, but also the sewage channels for those habitats. So EcoDue is also offering those types of services. The ameliorated services had advantages. We have price cost guaranteed via a mode of tariffication, which is reliable, and on the other hand, the regulation of the quality and the costs is agreed with the communes. The service is more rapid and simpler than the constructions of latrines, which is taking a few days and which is requiring the reorganization of the spaces and the management of the faces, and to mobilize some actors and inputs, which is very expensive and needing 1 cubic meters for each emptying. We also have support from the project, which is ensuring formal and legal framework in the context of economical and political launching, where the commune has to apply some regulations of rigorous hygiene and reach regional and national objectives in terms of hygiene. Here we have to identify some conditions we have to respect for an urban sanitation project, especially for the emptying of feces. and we have the application of the regulatory texts with an affordable prices, which is at the same time profitable for the managers and advantageous to the population. To have a station of treatment which has a capacity to respond to the needs of the population in a sustainable way, but also to have infrastructures responding to the environmental norms to be verified by the ONE before any types of implementation exploitation. And for that we need to formalize this domain by stopping those informal emptiers to practice their activities, but also to formalize the management of those emptying activities with some trainings. And finally, we should organize some information campaigns, education, and marketing for the popularization of the uses of the emptying appropriates and respecting the norms. And after those floor-free sections, the project has developed a certain number of tools for the management of emptied spaces with the different actors, projects, private sector or institutions can exploit and adapt to their contexts if needed to develop a sanitation project based on the emptying of the faces. And based on the presentation, those tools are available on the Runwash projects. We'd like to invite you to exploit them. They are useful for the development of projects, and they are models that we can adapt depending the context, but also the needs of the project. But if we move on to the business plan, we need to focus on different hypotheses, like the number of the total number of population, the desert rates in the use of latrines, to understand, to know the capacity and the turnout that can be provided by the zones, but also the definition of the production of unit products, and define the basis on dimensioning of the system and the logistical capacity for the operators, the providers. And we also need to consider the annual faces production for the hotels and the sanitary blocks. The households would be very users of those services, but in the same way we need to produce fertilizers from those emptied faces to maximize the turnout in terms of transformation of those products. So in order to reach the different layers of the population, we need to propose different costs depending on the types of pit. So we need to consider those different types of pits, and this is to touch the different layers of the population. And for the selling of those fertilizer, we have different scenario that we'd like to propose, like to provide directly the agricultural sites, for example, we also need to put in place local distributors to target the local markets, even if it's in a small scale, but we have to target a maximum number of small clients like farmers. We also need to place a system of delivery for different sites to complement to the treatment activities and extra activities after treatment. When we speak of the regulation of this particular activity, we have proposed in the model of business plan. We need to consider the taxes and the relevance for the local collectivities of 5% of communal taxes after redynamization and reform at the middle of this entity, which is EcoVid, and based on the existing situation, we have a turnout of 70% up to 2038, and we have some proposed prices between 50,000 and 100,000 ariary. These are just propositions, but it depends on the potentiality, of course, of the market, as we said, and the capacity of treatment of the sites in Fenaratsu cannot cover 15% of the available market. So overall, to sum up, my presentation takes an end on this study, so I would like to invite you to visit runwash.org and download those tools. The results, the diagnosis, and comparative studies are all available and usable for any projects. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. My presentation takes an end there. Thank you for your attention. I'd like to give the floor to my colleague, Chu. If you have any questions, please feel free. We are available to respond to them. Thank you. You have questions on the chat box? We have a few questions on the chat box. We're going to take it from the beginning. The question from Marina. Uh, 2 to 3 hours for the mode of collect shared is enough to. This is for the emptying. This is enough for an emptying. It depends on the types of the pits and the mobilized logistics to do those emptying activities. So it can take 2 to 3 hours. The second question, the feces used to produce gas and fertilizer, but the populations are very sensitive at those types of products because of the provenance, the origin of those, and therefore the fertilizer are sold and without mentioning the origins of the latter. So the clients are buying those. Of course, there is this cultural barriers, but the operators have their own approaches to attack those markets. We have those who are voluntarily labeling the origins of those fertilizer and using comparative examples, using the different the same types of cultivation agriculture used with the chemical fertilizer, and provide some comparative studies, and there the implementation place of those products may vary from the zones of interventions. And we mentioned in the studies, for example, in the eastern, in Atlanana, they do not have these cultural barriers, contrarily to the Machachambuni region of Aknakaraja. So this is varying depending on the policies and the policies of the operators and the zone of intervention. Second question from Marina, we are looking for potential emptiers, informal emptiers. Even if the sites are belonging to associations or private enterprises, we are sensitizing them to use affordable costs and responding to the needs of everyone. It's true, we need to formalize those informal emptiers who are not legal and who are not accountable compared to the other enterprises who are paying some redevance. And one of the approaches that we can propose is to recruit when I speak of informal operators, those informal emptying, we call them to be part of formal activities and to support them logistically, and we can exploit the potentiality of those informal emptiers by building the logistical capacity and the collect capacity of the operators, which is already formal and which is linked in contracts with the commune. Next question. Do the norms to be respected by the emptiers are clear for Madagascar? Same questions on the norms to be respected to the reselling of the transformed products. When we speak of the emptiers, the texts are clear, but unfortunately they are unknown for the actors. And when we speak of to be respected norms, those norms are mainly linked to the environment charts and providing the contracts to the formal emptiers with the validation of the ONE. No emptiers can practice legally the emptying, and only the ONE can provide some environmental impact studies on the validity of the emptiers who are working in the zone of intervention. But we need to formalize those emptiers, and the reselling of the transformed products should go under some analysis before the sales of those products, and to dates, based on the studies. Based on the studies we carried out, this practice is not yet popularized. The last question: does the contract management contract for the management of the sites or the whole value chain? I think that we need to put in place some competitions on the services, and to put in place some discharge policies, like the questions asked by Rudolf. We do not have national contracts yet. The project established a model based on the manual of procedure of the Ministry of Water, Sanitation and Hygiene, which was inspired by the contract of management. So to respond to the question, the contract for the overall from the collection to the transformation, they need to have a space respecting the norms, which is normally we should not have many operators working on the vessels emptying in one zone of intervention. We need to have one single operator owning a contract of management, a delegation of management with the public services, and under the responsibility of the communes, which is delegating, which is transferring the management of this model of contract for one operator who is going to take into account the chain of collect, go through the treatment, the transformation, and the sales of those products of transformative products. And we can also segment these depending on the types of services to be provided to the population. If maybe we can have an operator who is just working on the collection, maybe we can have another operator to work on the transformation only. And finally, we can have the dealer of those products. We may have another type of contract for them, depending on the scenario. No more questions? If there's no more questions, thank you so much. Can I say something? Thank you so much for Tu and Mandak. I can say that this is the situation on sanitation for remote places in Madagascar. And when I look at the strategies presented by Tu, it is not far from that. The general approach we are adopting is not to speak of health. That's meaningless to people to sell those latrines, and it's the first time I heard about the well-being of children. And one of the key messages we are promoting is the triggering, and for those who are peeing in the streets, who are not, who are practicing open defecation and peeing everywhere, for example, in French we say, we speak of triggering, but what we can say is there's a time when we have to decide, is it a need to build latrines? We do some sensitizations. We sensitize people to build latrines, and they have the trends to ask how to have latrines. But the idea is there's an importance of having latrines. Some people could build 2-story houses, but couldn't build one square meter of latrines. We have to sensitize them. We have to please them to build latrines, and yet this is an unavoidable needs apart from the strategy of promotion. Thank you so much for the sharing. There are lots of things we can explore. Thank you. Thank you, Marina. This was a very interesting feedback, and during the presentation, one of the psychological lever, a very strong psychological lever, the envy. When people envy, they are ready to buy into that thing, and if you cannot make people envy, it would be very difficult to have an automatic diffusion. And sometimes we hide the latrines, and if we have a very wealthy person, and that wealthy person has got a latrine, and everybody's going to envy that person, and that would create the demand, because people would ask, where did you get that latrine? So that is creating the envy, but the people are not envying actually the latrines, but the social status of the person, which are linked. When we speak of social status, a modern person or a developed person, whatever we like, depending on the sort of interventions, and in the coastal parts and in the highlands, those envies are varying from one place to another. And what Marina mentioned is very, very interesting. We need to find another lever which is more effective than the types of sensitizations we are providing. Thank you so much, Marina. If we look at the Grandwash website, you have the interface. We go to behavior change and services uses, and below we have the market-based sanitation with the different types of reports. Very, very heavy documents, but you can download them properly. And if you go to the interface, we have resources, and we have a seminar of capitalization 2022, and there we have capitalization seminar 2022 with the different presentation, human-centered design, where we can have detailed steps we presented, which are overlapping. Do not hesitate to explore and visit the websites for you who are much everybody for the participation. We also have one last webinar on